My buddy Austin, who leads our Church on the Block environment, shared about one of his son's favorite shows called If You Give a Mouse a Cookie. That show, which Austin's son Miles watches, is based on a book that came out years ago. Now, the goal and the purpose of the book is to help kids process the natural outcomes of specific decisions. So you see, if you give a mouse a cookie, he's going to ask for some milk. Now, last week, we talked about the second commitment of Church on the Block being together on mission. And we said that the purpose of our lives is to declare the praises of God. Now, just like in the book, if you give a mouse a cookie, there are natural outcomes when we begin to live our lives intentionally for the purposes of Jesus. Sometimes this kind of life stirs up questions within us. Sometimes we feel God stretching us beyond our comfort zone. Most often, living on purpose for Jesus will require us to make space for others in our lives. When God brings people closer to us because of what He's doing through us, it is a big deal. So I want to give you a couple questions to get you started as we begin today. The first one is, who is someone who made room for you in their life? And then, what impact did that have on you? In Acts chapter 5, we get a snapshot of life for the early church. In short, they were growing rapidly. People were beginning to follow Jesus at an amazing pace. But how they were learning about Him almost seemed like a mystery. Check this out in Acts chapter 5, verse 12 through 14. The apostles performed many signs and wonders among the people, and all the believers used to meet together in Solomon's colonnade. No one else dared join them, even though they were highly regarded by the people. Nevertheless, more and more men and women believed in the Lord and were added to their number. See, in week 1, we talked about an image that most of us see when we think about the church. We imagine a crowd of people in some sort of public building. Now, depending on our past experiences with the church, we may imagine just a handful of people. It could be hundreds of people, or maybe even thousands of people. The Bible makes it clear that the early church did gather together in large numbers. There could have been thousands of people gathering together at different times in the book of Acts. Clearly, this was a good thing in the eyes of the early church leaders because they kept this gathering going on a consistent basis. But right off the bat, we learn that while Jesus' followers gathered together publicly, the large gathering was not the environment in which they grew. Exploring Jesus in a public setting was not an entirely safe thing to do in that time. You see, following Jesus could make you a social outcast at best or send you running for your life at worst. Acts says this, that no one else dared join them, even though they were highly regarded by the people. Now, this sounds so prohibitive, but somehow this was not a growth deterrent for them. Because the very next sentence describes something that doesn't seem to make sense. It says, nevertheless, more and more men and women believed in the Lord and were added to their number. But if no one else dared join the church publicly, how in the world were they growing at such a rapid rate? Well, the answer is found a few chapters earlier in Acts chapter 2, and make sure that we understand that there is a connection by using the same phrase. Here's what it says in Acts chapter 2, verse 46 and 47. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. Did you catch that? They met both publicly as well as in their homes. If people weren't checking out Jesus when the church was out in public, where in the world were they meeting Him? In their homes and throughout the day. The early church built a pivotal practice back then that is just as important today. You see, they made a habit of inviting people in, first into their lives and later into a public space. Before we keep going, I want you to think about a few questions as you consider how to incorporate this early church practice into your own lives. First, are you wired more as an extrovert or an introvert? And give an example of why you believe this is. Now, with this in mind, does the idea of inviting people into your life excite or intimidate you? And then, what are some obstacles you think about when considering inviting people into your life or home? Again, the opportunity to invite people into our lives is a natural outcome of living life on purpose for Jesus. There is a direct correlation between allowing others to come close and their ability to take steps towards Jesus. The closer we allow people to come, the more they are able to see how Jesus fits into and shapes our lives. You see, seeing Jesus in our lives helps people imagine Jesus in their life as well. Knowing how to begin building this practice into our schedules or commitments can seem daunting at first. And I want to suggest 2 ways each of us can begin to make room for others in our lives, for them to be able to see Jesus in our lives. The first is simply this: make space in your group. Let me say that again. Make space in your group. There are a few things more rewarding than being around the right people. You see, we naturally gravitate to groups for so many reasons. Groups allow us to experience community without being responsible for an ongoing conversation with any single individual. Groups of people bring a natural buzz and excitement with them. And perhaps most importantly, groups of people allow others to experience more than the sum of any one individual's gifts or shortcomings. You see, it is through groups that we experience what community is truly like. Now, this was certainly true for the first followers of Jesus. In fact, in a letter to a church in the city of Corinth, Paul reminded them of this important reality. We find this in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 27, where it says, "Now you are the body of Christ, and each one of you is part of it." The word "you" is plural here, so think about it this way. If you're Southern, imagine Paul was saying, "Now y'all are the body of Christ. I'm not the body of Christ. You're not the body of Christ. But together, however, we are exactly that, a beautiful representation of Jesus." This is so important to realize. You see, Jesus didn't ask anyone to be the one-stop answer shop for anyone else's life. He didn't ask us to be perfect or without fault. It is when we are together that people get the clearest picture of who Jesus is. They see it in how we care for each other, respect each other, have fun with each other, and even hold each other accountable. You'll hear a little bit more on that next week. Making space for others in our group is so important. This is why we ask each church on the block location to host a party where members of the group and those who do not have a church home yet get to have fun together without any bait and switch. No surprise Bible study, no unexpected prayer time, real, actual, authentic fun. Maybe you throw a barbecue, you host a pool party, do a game night, or even go out for dinner. It doesn't matter. Just do something fun and enjoyable. Engage in something you love with other people and recognize that God can use that opportunity to spark curiosity in people's hearts. And as we get traction in those parties, we will also need to keep an eye on how much space we have available for others to join in. When our groups grow, we must respond in one of 2 ways. Either we find a larger space, or we send people out to start new groups, multiplying space for more people. Eventually, we earn the opportunity to invite people to worship with our group during our weekly gatherings. This invitation provides a huge chance for people to experience real community and to experience Jesus. Jesus in our midst and alive in our relationships. When we make space for others, here we allow them to test the waters of faith and belong with us before they believe like us. So what are some ways that your group could make room for others? And what kind of parties could you throw with the idea of helping others feel they belong? second way is to make space at the table. Let me say that again. Make space at the table. So what is the secret to great social connections? It's great food. If anything rivals community for a starting place for faith, it is sharing a meal together. This was a non-negotiable for the first century church. Again, in Acts chapter 2, we get a picture of this. It says this in Acts 2, verse 46, the second part of that verse. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts. Think about some of your favorite memories. Where were you? What were you doing? I can think back to some great memories in my early years of campus ministry at NC State University. After our large group gatherings each week, a crew of people would head out to Bojangles, and we would fill up the tables. As we ate and we talked and laughed, it was such a cool experience. People who maybe had never met before were now bonding over biscuits and chicken. What was really interesting was that there was a direct correlation between the growth of the number of people who went out to eat, then on to hanging out together in their homes, and then ultimately watching our large group meetings grow. As people shared meals and did life together and got to know each other better, they in turn brought more friends to connect, and our numbers grew. See, meals have a way of telling someone they matter. They matter enough that you invited them out or to prepare something for them in your home. Meals also communicate to others that they belong. You see, our world often moves at 1,000,000 miles an hour these days. And to make space in both our schedules and in our homes to tell others that they matter to us and our families. Why do you think the early church was so committed to eating together regularly? In a world where it's easy to feel out of place, sharing a meal reminds us that we belong with others and we belong with God. So here's my challenge. What if you personally committed to giving away 2 meals per month to help someone else experience a sense of belonging? Now, this is different from your group party. It could be lunch during the week or dinner over the weekend. Take it as a grand experiment in hospitality. Maybe you cook or go out or even order in. It doesn't really matter. Carve out 2 different times each month and just see what God does. As you meet, take the opportunity to start by thanking God for both your food and for your guests. Be sure to ask great questions during the meal and listen more than you talk. And as you lean in and hear what is happening in the lives of others, you will subtly communicate that those same things matter to the God you trust as well. As we wrap up our time together, let me leave you with 4 questions or next steps to process and discuss together. First is, what would you need to do to be able to share 2 meals per month with someone else? Next, who are some people you would like to invite to a meal first? Now, in your words, how would a shared meal matter to people searching for God? Here's the last thing to consider. In your group starter kit, there is a stack of pre-printed party invitations. Talk about what kind of party you can throw together, pick a date, and use these invitations to start inviting people this week.